And nobody had to tell me today.
If I take your notes, what'll happen?
Stop. He loves to torture me. Okay, review. Remember, you can find the purpose of this book in John 20, verses 30 and 31. He provided us this gospel so that with signs, telling us about the signs that Jesus performed so that we would believe that Jesus is the Messiah and that by believing, we may have life in his name. So that is the purpose. The themes, we've heard the bread of life, living water, light, and darkness, and are probably the four biggest themes out there. We left off last week in chapter 9, and at the beginning of chapter 9, all of chapter 9 is one story, and it's about the healing of a blind man. And we stopped at verse 12, where we talked about the story of Jesus healing a blind man. He picked up some dirt, he spit in it, put it on his eyes, put it on the blind man's eyes, told him to wash off his eyes, and he had sight. So we take up on verse 13. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, just real quick. One of the questions I want to sort of pose this week is it better to have knowledge or understanding? And it sounds like one of those self-help books or something, but I'm really serious. An example, I remember being on one of those fishing websites, and a guy tells this amazing story about porpoises and something they had done while and they really are they're very intelligent, and it's this great story. And some other guy jumped on and left a comment just chewing him out because they're not porpoises, they're dolphins. And he's really belligerent. And I, being foolish, got on right behind and said, do you understand? We all knew what the guy was talking about, okay? The flipper, the big nose, the gray sea cows. And he's just so focused on the name that they're really dolphins. Did I say that part? The guy said porpoises, and this guy got on and said, no, they're dolphins. And he's just so focused on the name that he misses the understanding of the story. This particular chapter details the healing of a blind man, and there is a lot of understanding in there. And as we read commentaries, we see a lot of people get focused on some details that are just not that important. And what you're going to see today is the story John records talks about blindness, and there are different kinds of blindness. And so the question is, this man who was blind from birth saw Jesus. He saw the Messiah. He understood. And these other people who had eyes, as we think about, not being blind, wouldn't see the truth that Jesus was telling them. So this blind man has understanding, and the Pharisees have knowledge, the leaders have knowledge, and you question which one is better. Is it to have traditional sight and yet not see? And so I mention that because he's going to talk about blindness two different ways, and you've got to be conscious of that he's not just talking about physical sight in a lot of the cases. So pay attention to that. I think it's better to have understanding than knowledge.
Chapter 9, verse 13. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened his eyes was the Sabbath. So the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. The man answered, he put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and now I can see. Because of this, some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a sinful man perform such signs? And there was a division among them. So once again they asked the man who had been blind, what do you say about him, since it was your eyes he opened? He's a prophet, the man replied. The Jews still did not believe that the man had been blind and had received his sight until they summoned his parents and asked, is this your son, the one you say was born blind? And how is it that he can now see? His parents answered, we know he is our son, and we know he was born blind. But how can he now see, or who opened his eyes? We do not know. Ask him. He is old enough to speak for himself. His parents said that said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already determined that anyone who confessed Jesus as the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. But that was why his parents said, "He is old enough, ask him." So,
Okay, can we?
yeah,
So remember this chapter, this story opens up. They passed the blind man, and Jesus' disciples said, who sinned to leave him this way, to leave him blind? Because this is sort of a belief with, at that time, a lot of in the Jewish culture, that if someone has a physical malady, it must be a result of somebody's sin, either his or his parents. They even believed you could sin in the womb, that before you were born, and you'd have these problems. And it's an easy thing to say for somebody who doesn't have any physical maladies currently. I don't know what they say when they get older and have them, but when they're young and strong and have no problems, and they say, well, these people are inferior to us. They have these problems because of sin. And of course, Jesus told them, no, that's not the case. But after he's healed these leaders, and we've talked a lot about how threatened they are by Jesus, how this threatens their power. And they call him in, like I said last week, like being called to the principal. And they said, what happened here, and how did he do it? And they get the guy, his explanation is so simple. He put mud on my eyes and told me to go wash, and I did, and I could see. And they aren't willing to believe that. Even though they've seen things with their own eyes, they aren't going to accept it. And they just grill him. And a lot of them think this must not really be the same guy. And he keeps saying, yeah, I am the same. It's me. I'm the guy. So they call his parents and say, what they're really inferring is the guy's been faking all these years. He's been faking so he doesn't have to work. They're convinced that everybody involved in this is a lowlife somehow. And they're breaking the law that says you're supposed to work. And so they go to the parents and say, what they're saying is, he wasn't really blind since birth, was he? Sadly, the parents are so afraid that if they say anything that indicates that this Jesus healed him, they're going to get thrown out of the synagogue. And that, happens to people. They get thrown out of synagogues. And so all they say is, look, this is our son. He really did used to be blind, and now he can see. As far as, anything else beyond that, anything about Jesus, ask him. He's a grown-up. So they don't want to take a stand on anything. They don't want to be subject to any sort of retribution. So they say, we weren't there. Ask him. He's old enough to speak for himself. And those kinds of tests happen right now. They happen to us, to the price of taking a stand on something when you see right and wrong can be pretty extreme. When you see things being taught that are about Christianity that are just mind-bogglingly wrong. But if you stand up, a lot of the time you're going to get a lot of flack. You can lose social status, you can lose all kinds of things. So this is what happens, and they say, go back and talk to him. He's big enough to talk for himself. We don't want to take any part of it. The one reference that the Jews had said already, that anybody who sort of even hints that this Jesus character is the Messiah that's been promised, they're going to get thrown out of the synagogue. And so that's a good way. I mean, we don't want anybody saying this. So if we punish people hard enough for saying it, no one will hear it, and therefore it makes it not true. That has huge implications for today, for the world we live in.
One of the things that got me at 13 is it was a Sabbath.
Yes.
And obviously the Sabbath is pretty special for the traditional Jews.
Yes.
Not to the ordinary Jew. Not to the guy who's blind gets clear. I hear a distinction between the Jews as opposed to the power of the Jews, the Pharisees, from John. And I'm thinking John is trying to emphasize the real split that's coming with the Messiah, because you can't, the Sabbath is in the book. You can't go against the book.
Okay.
And now Jesus is going to break the book. And he's going to get him crucified.
So let's talk about the Sabbath for a minute. We did a study one time on the Sabbath, and I really think we should probably do a better job of observing. It was a day of rest, and there's a you notice it says a Sabbath. It may not even, they celebrate Sabbath on Saturday, what we call Saturday, but it may not even been that kind of Sabbath. There are other high holy days that are considered Sabbaths, but it is a Sabbath. But yes, they're supposed to keep them. But there's a point where Jesus and his disciples are walking, and the disciples are hungry, and they reach over and grab some grain and put it between their hands and knock off the chaff and start eating the grains of the kernels of grain. And once again, the rulers, the religious leaders just have a fit, because doing this is considered milling, and that's work, and you've done work on the Sabbath. And one of the big things that Jesus says is, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. And the idea was about doing work. Originally, it didn't go down into all the little details about what's considered work. We're supposed to use our heads. When we were in Israel, they had an elevator, and some of you have heard this, but we were going up in the tallest building there in Tel Aviv, and we got on it, and it stopped at every single floor on the way up. I mean, it took us forever to get to the top. And we mentioned it, and the guy told us, oh, you got on the Shabbat elevator. And of course, we're ignorant. What's the Shabbat elevator? Well, pushing the button is literally considered work. So they program it to stop at every floor.
On Saturday.
And so what they did was turn the Sabbath into something that was a burden. And we see Jesus talk about that. You put hurdles in front of people. You put stumbling stones, and you don't lift a finger to try and help them get over it. And so this idea of it being a Sabbath, we don't think it's coincidence that he healed yet another person on a Sabbath. You know, he is making a point here. And so it is, the Sabbath is still important to the people like this blind man, simply because it's enforced with an iron hand. If you step out of line and somebody catches you, you can get some pretty severe punishments. So they know it's important, but it has become something that was never what was intended. And it was a day of rest, and there's always somebody who's trying to get ahead of his neighbors, and they want to sneak out and make a few extra shekels on the Sabbath. It was a day of rest. So yeah, it is an important thing. But the importance in this story is simply that Jesus goes out of his way, I think, to make sure he's healing on a Sabbath, because the message is you aren't worried. You think it's a problem to heal the whole man because of what day it is, because of the Sabbath. And he says, I'm here to heal the people. So yeah, the Sabbath is a big part of this, and it obviously will play out later in the chapter.
One more in this idea. He spits on dirt and makes mud.
Yes.
Patches of the eye. Is there any more to that symbolism in the story?
He spits on the ground in the mud. The only thing
He came from mud. I'm brought here from mud.
You know, we can look for significance. I mean, that's not there. I do think that this time, this is, it's something that most people would think is sort of gross. For all I know, there was some prohibition, against it. But the idea that he does it this way, and that it's probably would be frowned upon simply because it's somebody's spit. I'm not sure there's any more to it than that. If it's there, I haven't been able to find it, and I really, really looked. I think there probably is. Obviously, he chose this way of doing things for a reason. But other than the fact that, there are people who will make more out of how he did it than the fact that he did it. And that is what we see. They asked this guy, we just read it, how'd he do it? How did he do it? And they probably frowned on spitting and putting mud on somebody's eyes, but I don't know.
Verse 24. So a second time they called for the man who had been blind and said, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. There is one thing I do know. I was blind, but now I see." "What did he do to you?" they asked. "How did he open your eyes?" He replied, "I have already told you, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples?" Then they heaped insults on him and said, "You are his disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we do not know where this man is from."
Let's stop there real quick, okay? If you don't mind. So here the leaders go to have this blind man, and I mean he's on the carpet in front of them. This is a tough place to be. And they said, "Give glory to God and tell the truth. We know this man is a sinner." And you see that technique. They say, "We want the truth from you, but first we're going to tell you what the truth is." And if you don't say what we want you to say, you're not giving glory to God. You're not being true to God. So give glory to God and tell the truth for a change. And then this is what the truth is. We know he's a sinner. And that's also, that's a great technique. Once you sort of define it, then anybody who doesn't say what you want is lying.
And it would have been easy for the blind man to do that.
And it would have been easy for the blind man to just go along with it. And what I love is he says, you know what? Whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. It's above my pay grade. What I do know is I was blind and now I see. And that's a tough thing to get around. That's a theme that comes up in this a whole lot, is people who just refuse to believe what they see with their own eyes. They have a truth that they prefer, and so they're just gonna, anything that comes up contrary to that. And the guy says, it's pretty easy. You've already heard from me and my parents and all. You've seen me in the, down there begging. You know I was blind. I was blind from the moment I was born. So you're asking me about whether or not he's a sinner, or you're telling me you want me to get into that. And he says, I don't want to get into the weeds on that. That's, if you want to play with it, that's your business. But I can tell you this, I was blind and now I see. And it's a kind of a beautiful response, not getting drug into things that, I always say are above my pay grade, but things that are really probably not ours to weigh in on. And then here it is, Gene, it's what you were just talking about. What did he do to you? How did he do it? They want to find some flaw in the methodology. They're looking for the guy to say, he did such and such, and find some thing in the law that he stepped over so that they can then condemn Jesus for giving a man back his sight. And he says, I already told you what he did. You asked me. I asked, if this was a courtroom drama, they would say, asked and answered, Your Honor, no more. But he says, I already told you. Why do you keep asking me the same thing? Do you want to be his disciples? Are you asking so that you can believe? And that infuriates them. And I'm sure the guy knows they don't want to be his disciples. They want to find a way to trap him and say that he's, that he's bad. But he says, why are you asking all this about him? You interested? You want to be his disciples? And they heaped insults on him. They said, you're his disciple. We're disciples of Moses. And that's in logical fallacy. That's known as an appeal to authority. We quote some authoritative person, and it doesn't matter what you've seen. It doesn't matter, what's just there in front of you. People do this and twist logic. They appeal to authority and say, we're disciples of Moses. Therefore, anything we say is godly in truth. Again, a really common thing in our day and age. I guess it always has been. That's probably the mistake I make, is thinking that somehow things are different now than they used to be.
Verse 30. That's remarkable in. Sorry.
Pardon me, Mary, I'm sorry. But this authoritative figure, Moses, they know from reading the Testament, Moses turned the Nile River red and made snakes bigger than the other ones, and, I mean, Moses did miracles, going to God, going through him, getting done. How come they don't pick this up, and that insult about, do you want to be his disciple? Are you interested? I mean, that's a killer. And I'm wondering again, whether that's John stirring the pot. Hey, we give you another chance, and you muffed it out.
That is what a lot of John is about, is the fact that there were people, the religious leaders, that were presented with some pretty simple truth.
Lots
And
of signs.
Lots of signs, things that they just saw and couldn't deny, and they simply refused. But it's their pride, it's their arrogance, that, and so they fall back on, they love the law, because the law is a tool, it's a hammer that they can beat people with and keep them in line, and they thrive on power. And you notice at the end of this, they had said, we know where Moses came from. We know that, actually, he said, we know that God talked to Moses. So we're safe
We're not there
dealing
yet.
with, yeah, we are actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
I haven't read it yet.
yeah, you did.
Okay.
But go ahead, read it then.
Verse 30, that is remarkable indeed, the man said. You do not know where he is from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to the one who worships him and does his will. Never before has anyone heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do no such thing. They replied, you were born in utter sin, and you are instructing us, and they threw him out. Sorry.
So there was the line, though. They said, we know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this guy is from. And you see that weird importance on where he's from. They're going to say, well, he's from Nazareth, and nothing good ever came from Nazareth. It's all about status. It's all about power. It's all about, we can, so we don't know where he's from. And the guy says, well, that's kind of amazing. You don't know where he's from, and yet he gave me back my sight. You're worried about where he's from, and I'm telling you, the man gave me my sight back. And he says, we know God doesn't listen to sinners, which is, it's part of their belief. Mm-hmm. But he says that he does listen to the one who worships him and does his will. So he's actually saying, have any of you, nobody's ever heard of anyone giving back sight to someone who's born blind. Have you ever heard of anything like that? Can you guys offer something to me that would be more compelling than the fact that I was blind from birth and now I can see? And this man did it. And you're trying to cripple him. You're trying to, ultimately kill him. But look at what happened. Would God, that something like this has to come from God, and that God's not going to work through him if he's some terrible, blasphemous person. Why don't you see the simple logic in this? Why don't you see the truth that God works through this man? He gave me back my sight. Why don't you just look at what you see with your own eyes? That's the thing that you talked about something that applies to today. We have these arguments sometimes, and we think, why doesn't that person just look at what they see? Well, in this case, these signs that John is showing us are compelling. And he says, if this man were not from God, he couldn't do such a thing. And rather than listen to that and say, well, I guess that's kind of true. If he weren't from God, he couldn't do such a thing. He's not doing evil things. He's doing good things. And instead of thinking, well, maybe I miscalculated a little, what they do is they say, you were born in utter, I want to get it right, you were born in utter sin. So now they have fallen back on this idea that the reason he was blind is because of sin. And the sin he was born into was so bad, such abject filth, that he wound up being blind from birth as a result. And he says, they tell him, you were born in total sin, and you're going to lecture us? And there we get it again. We fall back on something allows us to just be blind to what's going on around us. And it is that is the message of this section, is the blind man saw with great clarity, and the men who have eyes and who are the leaders absolutely refuse to see which of them is more blind. And that's why I led off with the difference between knowledge and understanding.
And it's funny, one of the things when I think about the nativity story, this whole book of John, this first 9 chapters, makes me listen to the nativity story differently. I mean, we always know that Joseph had to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem because that's where he was from for the census. But isn't it amazing how God put all this together? If he had just said from the very beginning, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, if all the Jews knew that, that knowledge, would that have helped them believe? I don't know. But why did he do that? We don't know. But think about that. This whole thing about where is Jesus from? They knew the Messiah had to come from the line of David, that he had to be born in Bethlehem, and he was. But that wasn't common knowledge.
And the whole story, the idea that Caesar demanded the census, and it happened to be, through coincidence, it happened to be right at the right time. Joseph happened to be from Bethlehem. They go back just in time for the baby to be born in Bethlehem, and suddenly all the prophecies just fall into place, which, they're objecting because they don't know that. But the coincidences, the things that we do, and we look at these things and go, well, that's a kind of a cool coincidence, and we don't give credit too often to the fact that God takes a part in our lives.
Where does the line come from about, we know that God does not listen to sinners? Is that the Pharisees? Is there from, where is it coming from? It's illogical to me. I mean, you're not born perfect from the beginning, so we're all sinners, but we think today we're sinners. I don't know if the Pharisees ever thought they were sinners, but
Let's go with the fact, let's just, keep it short. You see them twisting a whole lot of things. There's this belief that goes way back. You read it through the Psalms, you read it through David, the idea that God takes care of his people. We tend to take that and say that, and they did sometimes, that anytime something goes inconvenient in our lives, I don't even always say wrong, that somehow God has failed us. That we're not, we don't live in a world where we have ups and downs. And they've taken this idea that God favors them, and therefore he disfavors all of the non-Jews, the people who are not the chosen one, and they've taken it to an extreme. And so where it comes from is a lot of tradition that they have built up over thousands of years. You read it in the Psalms of David all the time, where he's wanting God to come down and strike down the enemies, and burn them up, because he says, you're our God, we're your people, and you're supposed to do this for us. People tend to write their own myths about this stuff. They do. And God did favor them. And you can see through countless examples, I think even into today, where God favors them. But we like to think that we're the center of the universe, and anytime something is wrong for me, not the way I want it, that God owes me something. And so it's sort of an extension of that. God doesn't listen to sinners. He doesn't. So bad people, God wouldn't listen to, and yet he's doing these marvelous works. Therefore, he must be from God. And I get the logic, but, we twist a lot of stuff up.
When Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, he found the man and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" he replied. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." "You have already seen him," Jesus answered. "He is the one speaking with you." "Lord, I believe," he said, and he worshiped Jesus. Then Jesus declared, "For judgment I have come into the world, so that the blind may see, and those who see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this, and they asked him, "Are we blind too?" "If you were blind," Jesus replied, "you would not be guilty of sin. But since you claim you can see, your guilt remains."
And so here's sort of the wrap up of it. This is why I started out with the difference between knowledge and understanding. The leaders have a lot of knowledge of the scriptures, of what we call the Old Testament, and yet they refuse to see the things that are right in front of them. So Jesus, they've kicked this man out of the synagogue. And that may not sound like a big deal, but it's a big deal. It is a social sinner. It is at the heart of who we are. They've kicked him out. You're no longer welcome with your people. It's a big deal. And Jesus finds him, and after hearing it, he goes and tracks him down, and he says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Now, we see that term Son of Man a lot. And it is what, again, we call the Old Testament now, but in the old scriptures, this Son of Man is one of the ways the Messiah is referred to. It's understood by people at that time, and that this Son of Man is one of there's the suffering servant, the Son of Man, there's a number of references, but do you believe in the Son of Man, the Messiah? And he says, "Show him to me so that I can believe." And
So at that point, he believed he was a prophet.
he believes Jesus is a prophet, but he doesn't have a full understanding of who he is. He says, "But I trust you now. Show me the Son of Man. Show me this Messiah so that I can believe in him." And he says, "It's me. You're talking to him." And it's this wonderful single line. And I don't know, is this word for word? I think it's probably pretty darn close. He says, "Lord, I believe." And that's that beautiful statement of faith, of belief. And you and I talk about it quite a lot, Gene. When is belief enough? I don't know. This is as simple and straightforward as it gets. He had already said, "I trust you. So if you show me this Messiah, you show me the Son of Man, I'll believe in it because of what I've seen you do." That's why these signs are so important. And he says, "It's me." Well, that seems, I'm sure to the guy, almost a relief. Okay, all right, good. I knew you were a prophet at least, but if you're the Messiah, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. And there's another, kind of a sign of the faith. He worshiped him. And then Jesus declared, "For judgment," and we trip up on the word judgment a lot. I'm going to go past it for now. "For judgment, I've come into this world," for separating the what's right and what's wrong. But he says, "So that the blind may see," so that those who don't see can now see, and those who have sight, who think they can see, will be blind. And that's where I started. It's sort of this two different levels of seeing. You can perceive a lot of stuff and not really have a sense of what's going on in the world around you. And in this specific case, it's pretty obvious. The man who was born blind had understanding. When Jesus heals him, he understands at least this man is a prophet. He's not evil. He's sent from God. And when Jesus says, "I'm more than that, I'm the Messiah," he instantly receives that. He accepts it. And it says that there's some Pharisees, they're always within earshot. They're following him around. They're looking for him to trip up. And they hear him say that those who have sight will become blind. And they bow up at it. So what, are we supposed to be blind? Because remember, in their world, blindness is a sign of sinfulness. And so they bow up on the idea because obviously I'm not one of those sinful, weak people whose eyes don't work. So what, are we supposed to be the blind ones now? And this answer, when you think about it, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But since you claim you can see, your guilt remains. You're looking right at me. You've seen the works, you've seen the signs that John is telling us about, and it's not that you can't see, but you refuse to have understanding. And in that way, you're blind, yes. And because you've seen me, because you've seen this stuff, and you refuse to accept it, your guilt remains. And it's pretty powerful stuff. And at the very least, it's a way for us to look at ourselves, that we do sometimes get a little headstrong. We decide what we're going to believe, and then look for things to in terms of doing sermons, it's called proof texting. You come up with an idea, and then you go look for little single out of context scriptures that sort of fulfill what you're trying to get at, rather than looking at what's there and saying, what does that mean in its context? We tend to decide what we're going to believe, and then just go with it.
Chapter 10.
Well, pardon me. This reminds me of Jesus selecting the apostles. Nobody turned him down
That we know of,
that we know of.
right?
Victor should get the right to history. But this guy was inclined, but didn't really believe that he was told by Jesus himself. Now, where do you go from there? Jesus is telling you himself, I am the Messiah. What options do you have? If you don't, then you're as blind physically and spiritually. And I don't know, understanding and knowledge, you got to have that Paul idea. It's got to be in your heart.
Well, and it does. It is the heart. Always we see it's the heart. And I realize you said nobody ever turned him down, but there's that rich young ruler who comes along, and he says, I've done all this stuff since I was a child. I mean, he's basically saying I am sinless. I do all the things in the law. And the idea of love your neighbor, love your God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. I do all that and always have. And he says, well, good. Then there's just one thing that remains. Go sell all your stuff, free yourself from all that, and follow me. And it says he went away sad. So there's at least one person who did say no. I don't think Jesus thought for a minute the guy's going to do it. He understands his heart. But that is it exactly, Gene. That is exactly it. That there are people who see these things and they know deep down what the truth is, but they're just not going to follow. They're not going to let go. And you're right. They are as blind as these leaders. At times, I'm as blind as these leaders, and I assume that most everyone else is. But the idea of those who received him, he gave the right to become the children of God. Those who received him, and there are people who simply refuse. And it's a sad thing. I think it shouldn't be looked on as something that we condemn them for. It's a tragedy, really.
Chapter 10. Truly, truly, I tell you, whoever does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. But the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen for his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will flee from him because they do not recognize his voice. Jesus spoke to them using this illustration, but they did not understand what he was telling them. So he said it to them again. Truly, truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it in all its fullness.
And there, just quickly, start at the end. I've come so that, let me get it exactly how it's phrased here. I've come so that they may have life and have it in all its fullness. This is a thing that he talks about in other places, this life more abundant.
That's the here and now, not the heaven.
And yes, there's more than just people saying, well, what happens, will I go to heaven when I die? What Jesus says, what I want for you is a life here that is more abundant, that it has fullness in a way that you don't have without me and without what I'm teaching. And it's important sometimes to remember the goal and then go back and figure out how we got there. And he's saying, I've come so that, you can have life in all, they can have life in all its fullness. But Jesus does this illustration, and we're told it's an illustration. He's telling a story. One thing I'd like you to keep in mind, I've said this in some other studies, but often when Jesus is talking to the religious leaders, to the Pharisees and Sadducees and the scribes, when he's talking to them, he's talking this way, but he's teaching this way, back over his shoulder. He's teaching his disciples. He's teaching the people who are watching. And they're seeing a lesson play out in real time. So he tells them this story about a shepherd and about the sheep. And it's something that all the other people are real familiar with. And he talks about how, he says, whoever doesn't enter the sheepfold by the gate climbs in some other way is a thief. And they understand that. I mean, it is in the way of an illustration, there are people who go around stealing other people's livestock, and they know that. And so he's making a point in a way that people will understand that there are people who try and go about things, the wrong way, and they're there to steal. They're there to kill. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd. He refers to himself as a shepherd so many times, and the people are getting this. The religious leaders, not so much. He says that the gatekeeper, and we understand this is God. He has that relationship, opens the gate. But it says the sheep listened for his voice. It says he knows them by name. And the sheep understand and recognize his voice. And so he's teaching a thing here that should be fairly obvious. He goes on and, he says, he calls his own sheep by name and he leads them out. When he's brought them out, brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. The people are responding because they recognize my voice. The Pharisees, the leaders, are not going to hear this, and he knows that. But the other people are understanding what he's saying, that people are following me because I call them by name and because they recognize my voice. He says, but they'll never follow a stranger. And that's the reason why they don't follow the religious leaders the way the leaders want. They may be able to compel obedience, but they're not following them. They don't like them because they know who they are. They recognize it. In fact, they'll flee from them because they didn't recognize his voice. So here's this, this illustration of himself as the shepherd, of being the real deal. And he's saying right in front of the religious leaders, I'm the real thing, you are not. You're those who sneak in and want to rob and kill and destroy. And they don't recognize what he's saying.
Verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand...
Hold on, I
Okay.
forgot you. And this is where we do this all week, and I've been through this so many times. Sometimes it's hard to remember what we've done here and what we've done, 6 other times at home. But let's go, if you have your Bibles there, to verse 6. And John tells us straight out, Jesus spoke in this illustration, and they didn't understand what he was telling them. So now he says, I'm going to go about it a different way. So, he told them again, truly I tell you. And so now instead of the shepherd, he says, I'm the gate. I'm the gate that has to be passed through. You want to get to the sheepfold, or you want to get to life. I'm the gate to get there. And he says, I'm the gate for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers. And he's still talking about the people who come over, who sneak in. But he's talking about the religious leaders right in front of them. All of those who came before, all of you people are thieves and robbers. You're trying to pretend to be something that you really aren't. And the sheep didn't listen to them. And that's a perfect analogy. The people really do not like these leaders. They follow out of fear. He says, I'm the gate. Me, I'm the gate. If anyone enters through me, he'll be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The idea of finding pasture is the life more abundant that he keeps talking about. You will find, you'll find rest. You'll find a peace through this gate. The thief only comes to kill and destroy. I've come that they may have life and have it in all its fullness. And so, it sounds like it's complicated. It's not that complicated. You can see what he's saying. He's saying you people have made yourselves, all of your structure is the pathway you claim to come to God. And he's saying, you're not. It's me. You're going to come by way of me. And the other people who try and set themselves up are thieves and robbers. They are taking what is not theirs. And in a lot of cases, it's authority. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
He doesn't make a distinction in that statement about Moses. All who came before me, if I'm a good Jew and I'm reading all the believer of Moses, has he just condemned Moses also as a thief?
Well, as a gate, certainly Moses and the law were not the gate. They pointed ahead. And he said just a few chapters ago, remember basically, that the law pointed to me. If you believed Moses, you'd believe in me. So I don't know that it's a condemnation, but Moses was not setting himself up as the pathway to God. He was saying that, we got the law to help us, and he delivered that, but he didn't set himself up. He wasn't that kind of arrogant. So I don't think it's necessarily a condemnation. We understand that the law.
It's a condemnation of what people did with
what
Moses,
they did with
but
the
not
law.
with Moses.
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily that. This is really about them. Yeah.
I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd. The sheep are not his own. When he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf pounces on them and scatters the flock. The man runs away because he is a hired servant and is unconcerned for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them in as well, and they will listen to my voice. Then there will be one flock and one shepherd.
You want to talk? You came to some great stuff this week. Do you want to talk about that?
No, well, it's further on.
Lay down my life?
No.
Oh, well, it's that there are hired hands, and it's not their sheep. And when things get a little bit rough, they'll sell them out. They'll take off. They have nothing. And again, he's talking about these leaders. You guys are the hired hands. You're the help. You're not here. You sort of look over the people in that you rule them, but you're not here for them the way I am. I'm the good shepherd, and the good shepherd, I laid down my life for my flock. That's clearly him talking about what's to come.
It just always hit me with John, and I think I said it last week, that John is writing this, decades later, and he is sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, everything makes sense now. The disciples didn't understand this stuff. The disciples at this point didn't know Jesus was going to be crucified for their sins. I mean, they didn't understand that. And all of a sudden, he goes back and he probably wrote some of this stuff down, as you've said, along the way. But all of a sudden, it makes sense to him.
I don't want to talk too much because it's going to, as Mary said, it's going to come up in the next verses. And she really had those, couple of big moments this week. Things really spoke to her, and I want her to do it. But one thing I do want you to notice, it's up in verse 16. I have other sheep that are not of this fold. We keep talking about it, the fact that the Gentiles, this was always designed for them to be brought into the fold, for them to be grafted on to the root, for them to be part of this. And here he is just saying point blank, I have other sheep
Other than Jewish people.
not of this fold. They're not Jewish, and I must bring them in as well. It's a beautiful thing for us. I will bring them in as well, and they will listen to my voice. Then there will be one flock and one shepherd. And I hope everybody understands. It seems pretty obvious to me, but he's saying we're all, one people here. You're all Jews I'm talking to, but there are other sheep that are not of this fold, and I'm going to bring them in, and it'll be one flock and one shepherd. They will listen to my voice. They will believe what I'm teaching, and they'll become a part of the fold as well. To me, that's just a beautiful statement of what's going to come.
The reason the Father loves me is that I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. Again, there was a division among the Jews because of Jesus' message. Many of them said, he is demon possessed and insane. Why should you listen to him? But others replied, these are not the words of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? One of the things here, I have the authority to lay it down, which is his life, and authority to take it up again. We were talking about how we were raised. We always, when we think about Jesus being crucified, we talk about, the Jews killed Jesus. The Pharisees killed Jesus. And in our study, when we talked about Luke, Scott would emphasize Jesus was headstrong that last trip to Jerusalem to get there. He knew he was getting there to be crucified, to sacrifice his life for our sins. This idea that it was done to him is something I think we were raised with, but we need to look at this differently. He laid down his life for us.
And he out and out says it right here. I mean, I've mentioned that numerous times. Never think that someone took his life from him. Never think that someone killed him against his will. He went headlong to Jerusalem that last trip, knowing and making sure that it happened. And he says right here, I lay down my life for my flock. No one takes it from me. I lay it down willingly. And what we're laughing at is we got taught, the Jews killed Jesus. Well, no, that means he sacrificed himself. And here he is saying it, point blank. I lay down my life. No one the reason the Father loves me is because I lay down my life for my flock. I lay it down willingly. Nobody takes it from me. Another sort of beautiful statement.
I think you're absolutely right, but again, the language fails us. And the level of what I see the Jews going to the Romans to crucify him. I mean, no question about it in my earthly being that the Jews killed Jesus, had Jesus killed. No question about it. We're hearing it in this preparation. The Jews are going to kill me. I know they're going to kill me. He says it here, I'm doing this willingly because I'm obeying the Father. And that is great. Even Peter told him not to go. Don't go, because they're going to kill you. And he says, get away, Satan. So this is on the earthly level.
But even on the earthly level, Gene, and we'll see it, we've seen it once already in John, and we're going to see it coming up again. There are several times when they say people took up stones to kill Jesus, right, and Jesus disappeared. And we never, I don't know, I've never really heard a sermon on those lines. Jesus disappeared. We don't really think about it. I mean, those are other miracles. What do you mean Jesus disappeared? I mean, they were, pardon me?
Go ahead.
It doesn't say disappeared?
Well, he passed among them. But,
yeah.
We don't know how it worked, and that's sort of the point. That's the nature of a miracle. But they were trying to kill him then. Yeah. They
but it wasn't the right time.
It was not. He was not yet his time, and he just sort of passed. And but the thing, I'm pretty adamant about this, that being who he was, if he didn't want them to kill him, they wouldn't have done it. And he understood the sacrifice, the atonement that makes way for us had to happen. He had to do things first, and when it was time, in the fullness of time, He just laid down his life. And there's a big difference between saying laid down his life and they came and stormed the gates and took him away against his will and everything. He laid down his life as a sacrifice. That's repeated so many times. I think it needs to be seen that way.
And I agree with that, but he's always had the message to come and pay for our sins and the sacrifice at spiritual level. So that's his mission. That's why he's here. He's not going to
Sure.
let down even though he tries at the guard to say, if there's any way to say, pass this cup. But I keep thinking of that sheep analogy, and when you slaughter sheep and you put them in that crucible, they're going to relax.
Okay.
When they give up, they say, I know you're going to kill me. And they're going to relax. Their body relaxes. Which is part of the way I think Jesus fully given of himself, because that's his mission. You can put thorns in my head, you can crucify me, that's okay. I'm not going to bring my army from heaven, angels, and protect me, or my earthly army, and prevent it, because I've got to do it. I've got to obey the Father. The Father and I are one. And
Well,
that's a beautiful
let's
side of the
go
story.
with this then, and it's almost right at 10 o'clock now, and we've just got a few more sentences. But maybe part of what you should get out of this is to understand Jesus is not a sheep. He is different, and we talked early in this. I talked a lot about how people want to reject the deity, the fact that he is God incarnate. He is God. Emmanuel means God with us. Yeah, that's why they chose that name, one of the names they know him by. And the fact is, he's not a sheep. He doesn't get led off into a thing and relax. He literally goes intentionally headlong into the place where he's going to sacrifice himself. He's not like us. He's not one of us. Not exactly. He's a man, but he is God incarnate. And so for him to lay down his life is truly a sacrifice. And there's a difference between him and the sheep that he leads. The last thing we want to do in this, again, there's division among the Jews. Some of them say, man, he's possessed by a demon. And this guy's nuts, or he's possessed by evil. And the other ones at least say, this doesn't sound evil. This doesn't, what I'm hearing here doesn't sound like he's saying anything wrong or anything evil. In fact, remember, he gave a blind man his sight. So even amongst the hardcore, if you will, people in the Jewish leadership, there are a bunch of them that are listening to this and going, I'm not really hearing anything worthy of condemning him over. And they're at odds with each other. But you'll find that the power mongers win the debate, I think, just because they're louder. But anyway, can a demon open the eyes of the blind? That's it for today?
That's it for today.
God, you thought enough of us to make this provision, to make this gateway, this sacrifice that allows us to be reconciled with you. And we don't always understand it. We search for the mechanics. How does it work? We search for knowledge instead of understanding, instead of acceptance. And that's a flaw of ours. We feel justified in questioning how you do things rather than simply opening our eyes and recognizing that you do. And instead of being grateful and thankful, we wind up skeptical. We wind up questioning rather than accepting. And we ask for hearts that are opened, that are broken if necessary, to be able to accept those things you show us out of your love for us, out of your very constant love for us. Help us this week, as always, as we go out, we meet people, to remember the grace shown to us and to show at least some measure of that to those we encounter. Amen.
You guys can turn on your mics. Happy birthday, Paula. I hope you're doing something fun today.
Where is she? She here?
She is right there, yes, there you go.
And that's
Happy
Monica,
birthday
right?
to you.
Uh,
Happy birthday.
Monica
to
down
you.
below.
Where is she?
Um,
Happy
yes.
birthday, dear Paula. Happy birthday to you.
There you go.
And we have Monica on our screen. You're a telephone down in the bottom right corner, but it's good to have you with us. And sometimes you have to tell us something about yourself, just because I like to know people. We get to know each other on here. It's weird that it's on Zoom, but we still get to know each other.
There you go.
I'm Monica.
There you go.
And one other thing, since there's a few of you left on that, I know she's not still here. The party last week,
Sherry.
Sherry and
got
Dave.
off- Yeah.
Sherry had that great get together, and we had to go because Mary had to work at the Art Center's annual thing, and I regret it. Some of you I only got to see for a few minutes. And I kind of feel guilty about that, but it was good to see you show up. It was a nice thing to do. And Jack, it was good to see you there.
Oh, great to see you too.
We'll talk to you soon.
Have a good week, you guys. Safe travels, Louise.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, Mary and Scott, as always.
See you guys
Bye,
later.
y'all. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Goodbye.